Welcome to The Path to Lawyer Wellbeing, Practical Recommendations for Positive Change, sponsored by the American Bar Association, Commission on Lawyer Assistance Programs, Center for Professional Responsibility, and the ABA Center for Professional Development. Moderating the program today is Tracy Kepler. Tracy is Director of the Center for Professional Responsibility at the American Bar Association and is located in Chicago, Illinois. Tracy, please go ahead.
Great, thank you so much. And good afternoon or good morning, depending where you are joining us from. Welcome, and we thank you for participating in this webinar today. Joining me today on the program are Bree Buchanan, and Jim Coyle. Bree is the Director of the State Bar of Texas Lawyers Assistance Program and is located in Austin, Texas. James Coyle is Attorney Regulation Counsel for the Colorado Supreme Court and is located in Denver. Both Jim and Bree are the co-chairs of the National Task Force on Lawyer Wellbeing and for the report that we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to go ahead and kick things off, but please feel free to submit questions as we go along, and we'll try to answer them throughout the presentation as well as at the end. In my beginning presentation, I want to tell you about how we've gotten to this place, how we are from the past, how we got here, and then as we go forward, we're going to talk about the present and also the future. How did we get to where we are? And who really is this National Task Force on Lawyer Wellbeing? Well, it's really made up of members from all different sectors of the legal profession. And you can see some of them up on the screen. And in addition, we also have law school faculty and deans as members of the task force. For those of you who are not familiar with some of these organizations listed, the National Organization of Bar Counsel is a nonprofit organization of legal professionals whose members enforce ethics rules that regulate the professional conduct of lawyers in the U.S. and other global jurisdictions. In addition, the ABA Commission on Lawyer Assistance Programs and APRIL, which is the Association of Professional Responsibility Lawyers, a nonprofit organization founded in 1990 that is comprised of law professors, judges, attorneys, all holding an interest in lawyers' professional responsibility, legal ethics, and attorney well-being. Other members are the ABA Center for Professional Responsibility, as well as its Standing Committee on Professionalism. How did this task force begin? Well, it really developed out of two studies in 2016. The first one being Suffering in Silence, relating to a survey that was done of law students, their well-being issues, as well as the reluctance of them to seek help for substance abuse and mental health concerns. The other study that we looked at was one that was done by Patrick Krill and Linda Albert and was published in the Journal of Addiction Medicine, which was a study of the prevalence of substance abuse and other mental health concerns among American attorneys, which Bree is really going to talk about later. The results were profound, and we determined that something really needed to be done, that to maintain the status quo as we have it right now wasn't an option, and that there were really too many in our profession who were exhausted, impaired, disengaged, or too self-absorbed to really develop into their best selves. Many in our profession, based on the study results and what we know, show that we are a profession drained of civility, compassion, and we're also plagued by chronic stress, poor self-care, and high rates of depression and alcohol abuse. What that shows us is that the profession really isn't living up to its full potential, and a place where attorneys can thrive, best serve their clients, and contribute to a better society. We took this research and we went forward. And what happened next was a task force was developed. In spring of 2016, the presidents and board members of the various organizations endorsed creation of this national task force in response to the findings of the studies. We had one meeting back where 6 people were sitting around a table, and it grew and grew and grew, until we worked hard, we researched, and it all culminated in a report that we're going to talk about today. And this all happened within the span of 1 year. To talk about the studies and on what the results that we looked at to get this task force going, I'm going to turn to Bree to talk to us about some of the specifics. Bree?
Thank you, Tracy. And I am just so honored to be able to be on this program and share this information with you. And before I get started, I want to just tell you, just adding a little bit onto the genesis of this, and emphasizing that this really was a grassroots group, a grassroots effort. This is not a formal ABA entity. We, the people that work in these issues across the country, feel so passionately about this that we sat down in August of 2016 and said we have to do something. And we decided to act first and ask permission later, which fortunately a lot of people are jumping on board, and it's really exciting about that. But I wanted to emphasize to everyone that this whole project stems from passion about this work. And I think that you will hear that in our voices as we go through this. So just a little bit about the Suffering in Silence, the law student survey. Both of these surveys, the one with the law students and the one regarding lawyers, were both published in 2016. So we really had a strong impact of being able to look at most of the legal profession. So the law school survey, I'm just providing you with just a few snippets of this. If you look, both of the studies are quite representative. We had 3,300 law students from 15 law schools. And as an example of what we found of the degree of, impairment that we found among law students is that 1/4, based on their reported drinking practices and patterns, were at risk for alcoholism. And I can tell you it's not a big surprise for, I think, a lot of us who looked at this. We all certainly know we've been there, done that. We know that drinking is a cultural norm, certainly within the law schools, and that's how we are taught to deal with our stress. So now we have the statistics and the numbers to demonstrate that. This survey also looked at the mental health of law students. And there's 17% depression. If you take out that mild on the anxiety, it's really 23% moderate anxiety, such that 37% of the law students surveyed reported having moderate to severe anxiety. And most disturbingly, I believe, is that 6% had suicidal thoughts in the last year, that looking at suicide could possibly be some sort of solution to the difficulties that they were facing. So that's really discouraging. And the theme that we found across the board in all of the work we do, and again, these are things that those of us who deal with these issues within the profession already knew, is that lawyers and law students will not ask for help. They are terrified of somebody finding out that they may have a problem which will result in their not being able to be admitted to the bar or not being able to get a job. And it's really about the stigma that attaches to these disorders, and we'll talk some more about this later. To give another statistic from this survey that really brings this home, it was asked how many thought they needed some mental health help in the past year, and 42% responded affirmatively to that. Then they asked, well, how many of you who had problems actually got counseling? And of those that responded, only 21%. So there's a huge divide there between the numbers of people who are having problems and are being willing to seek help. And if you look here, this was taken from the survey as well. Really, over half of them said it's just better to keep these problems hidden. And of course, what we know is that when you're hiding these issues and you're lying or deceiving the Board of Law Examiners, as it's called here in Texas, you're going to go underground. You're not going to ask for help. And we'll hear this over and over, that these diseases of depression, mental health, many of the mental health disorders and the substance use disorders are chronic and they are progressive. And without some sort of intervention, they will continue to get worse. And we see that in the Lawyers Assistance Program community over and over again. Moving on to the study for the lawyers. This was done of 13,000 employed lawyers across the country. And just to give you a snippet of this, and the study was commissioned by the Commission on Lawyers Assistance Programs and done in conjunction with the Hazelden Betty Ford Treatment Center, also published in 2016. So to give you just a taste of this, you had a question, a standard survey. It's called the Audit 10. 10 questions to talk to ask people about what their level of drinking or their impaired disordered drinking was. And so if you look at this graph, and I'll fill in the numbers there, 6.4% of the general population who are over 25 years of age, 21% of all attorneys responding to that survey experienced problematic drinking, and if you look down in the definition, that was defined as hazardous and possibly physically dependent. So we're talking about pretty significant hardcore drinking behaviors. And then that third bar there, and I apologize for that, is 32%. That for attorneys under 30 years of age, a full third of those lawyers were experiencing problematic drinking. And to shed further light on this, I wanted to share with you the people who did this survey. They knew that the doctors had just taken a survey like this, and they had been asked what's called the Audit 3, which is just basically questions inquiring into how much you drink and how often you drink. The answers for the physicians came in at 15%. 15% is scoring as problematic drinkers when you ask these three very basic objective questions. The response for lawyers was 36%. So I think that that's really something to think about, because obviously doctors too are dealing with very high stress, demanding that they perform well, just like lawyers. So something to really think about. The study also looked at questioned lawyers about their rates of mental health, 28% depression, 19% severe anxiety, and here we have again on suicidal thoughts, 11.5% at some point in their career felt that perhaps suicide may be a solution to their issues. In this study, one of the most profound things that we found, that people that do this work regularly generally knew that it was about 1 in 5 of the general lawyers' population had a substance use or a drinking problem, so we'll call it that. What we didn't know is that the disproportionate rate at which these issues, both substance use disorders, depression, and anxiety, were affecting our younger lawyers. And this study was very strong in demonstrating that the younger the lawyer, the greater the rate of impairment. The older the lawyer, the good news is that the older the lawyer, the rates of depression and substance use disorder declined. Prior to getting the results of this, we who do this work had thought that it was the opposite. We thought it was the longer that you experience these, your work life, the greater the disorders would be. So that bodes ill, I would say, if we have the youngest members of our profession who are having the greatest difficulties. And I think there are a variety of reasons why. But the study did not go specifically into answering those questions. And again, the barriers to seeking help. It was prevalent among law students and is even greater among lawyers. They don't want anybody to know that they may need help. And if you think about it, of course, the lawyer's greatest asset is his or her reputation. And we're not going to do anything to risk that. And if we're not willing to be vulnerable, to be open about any of these things, then we will not ask for help. And when we don't ask for help, we cannot get better. And these diseases and these disorders progress. And it all gets back to stigma. So again, we'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. And right now I'm going to turn it over to Jim.
Thank you, Bree. So I'm going to take everybody back to August of 2016 for a moment. At that point, both of these studies had been released. We had these numbers in front of us, and they were staggering. They were they were upsetting to those of us who participate in the regulation of the legal profession. We knew we had to do something, and we knew we had to act quickly. While those reports were released in early 2016, nothing had happened really in those intervening 6 or 7 months. So at that August 2016 meeting, 6 people showed up in a conference room. Half of them are here on this phone call doing a presentation. And we had to decide, what are we going to do? These numbers, we can't continue with these types of numbers. And as some of us were baby boomers, and we'll be retiring, getting out of the profession at some point, and with all these law students and younger lawyers coming into the profession, what can we do to help them have a better career, more satisfying career, and thrive? And so we decided to create a movement. We decided that we were going, humbly speaking, we were going to try to change the culture of the legal profession. We had to do something quickly and effectively. And I apologize, how do I move this forward? Tracy, would you mind moving forward? Thank you. And so we decided to create a movement. We advertised it a little bit, asked people to participate. As soon as we got involved, there were a lot of people that were anxious to join us. The Young Lawyers Division of the ABA, the Center for Professional Responsibility, the Conference of Chief Justices, and other leaders throughout the profession. And what we did as a task force, we focused on impairment and well-being issues. Over the course of the year, we prepared a report with 44 practical recommendations. We focused on systems and procedures in the legal profession on how to improve. We looked at who the legal stakeholders were, where we could make the most change most effectively, and we had to start off with the law schools. If you enter the profession with a 6.4% chance of having a substance use issue, and then you graduate and you have a much higher rate of mental health disorders and substance use, and you go into a profession in which young lawyers have a bigger problem, we had to get the law schools involved. We had to get the state Supreme Courts involved and all judges involved in this as community leaders. The regulators, we had to accept the fact that we, the regulators, had responsibility and could be part of the problem, and thus we had to be part of the solution. Legal employers, law firm culture. How do we change law firm culture to where it's more rewarding and more productive for everybody involved? Bar associations. How can we change the culture of bar associations to focus on lawyer well-being and have less focus on alcohol-related events? So we faced great challenges, and those are shown on this graph of all of our challenges in the legal profession, but we also recognize our great potential, how we can do better, how we can take those skills that we've learned through life and be better at what we do and be healthier. So our first task was really to define what is lawyer well-being. And we followed the World Health Organization definition of well-being in many respects. And we recognized that it was a continuous process towards thriving in 6 different dimensions. First, occupational. How do we cultivate personal satisfaction, growth, enrichment in our work? How do we create financial stability? That's an important part, an important dimension. Intellectual dimension. How do we continue on with the pursuit of creative and intellectually challenging activities? How do we continue on with our professional development? How do we monitor our own well-being? Spiritual. How do we develop a sense of meaningfulness and purpose in our lives? Physical. How do we take care of that shell, our bodies, making sure that we get regular physical activity, proper diet, nutrition. How do we rejuvenate every day? And when do we know we need to seek help? Social, we recognize that isolationism is a significant problem when it comes to well-being issues. We have to develop a sense of connection, belonging, and a developed support system. And then finally emotional, recognizing the importance of emotions and how they play out throughout the day, developing ability to identify our own emotions to support mental health, achieve our goals, and make informed decisions. And then again, seeking help for mental health when needed. So we had those definitions.
So in doing this research, we really had to come up with 3 primary reasons or core areas for us to take, why we need to take action and why we needed to do it now. And the first one that we looked at was organizational effectiveness. It just makes good fiscal sense for business. Attorney well-being contributes to organizational success, and for law firms and corporate counsel, attorney health is really kind of an important form of human capital that provides a competitive advantage. And if you think about it from these areas like job satisfaction or retention or turnover, having well and healthy attorneys just makes good fiscal sense. The second reason we felt it was important to take action was ethical integrity. It's just good for clients. Think ethics and think attorney well-being influences all things ethics and professionalism. Just looking at the ABA model rules of professional conduct, if you look at the first one, 1.1, competence, right there. You need to be well to be a competent attorney. Diligence, 1.3. Or how about the 4 series of 4.1 through 4.44, which regulate working with people other than your clients? Or even something so simple as the preamble to the ABA Model Rules of Professional Conduct, which calls lawyers to strive to attain the highest level of skill, to improve the law and the legal profession, and to exemplify the legal profession's ideals of public service. One of the authors of our report showed us that between 40 to 70% of disciplinary proceedings and malpractice claims against attorneys actually involve substance abuse or depression or both. So it just makes sense. And the third reason, or the core component we felt it was necessary to take action, was how about just being a human being? Humanitarian reasons. It's good for lawyers, and it's good for their families, and it's good for the legal profession. Promoting well-being is just the right thing to do. As I said at the outset, too many of us are really living unfulfilled lives. And these untreated or undiagnosed mental health issues and substance use disorders are ruining lives and careers, and we needed to do something about it. So we came up with 5 core steps for a sustainable culture in the legal profession. And these recommendations are set out, or the core steps are set out in the task force report. And they are, the first one being identifying the stakeholders and the role that each of those stakeholders can play in reducing the level of toxicity in our profession. The second one really centered around that stigma issue, ending the stigma surrounding the help-seeking behaviors. And in the report, which is actually attached as part of the materials to this CLE, there are all sorts of recommendations to fight this stigma. The stigma that seeking help is going to some way or in some way affect or have a negative effect or negative professional consequences. The third step was emphasizing that well-being is an indispensable part of a lawyer's duty of competence, back to that Rule 1.1 that I was talking about. There's a nexus or a tie-in between this competence and well-being, and one of the recommendations is actually to include this connection and to give it some formal recognition in modifying the rules of professional conduct or their comments to add some sort of reference or commentary on the attorney well-being issue. Fourth, We looked to expanding all sorts of educational outreach and programming on well-being issues. And the fifth one was to make health and well-being a top priority throughout the profession, really changing the tone of the profession one step at a time. Small steps that can actually start this whole process, which we feel is necessary to place health, resilience, self-care, and helping others at the forefront of really what it means to be a lawyer. Some general recommendations that are contained within the task force report. We're going to take a look at some of them, the overarching, but probably not get through all 44. And the first one we wanted to take on, the first general recommendation we wanted to discuss, is really to acknowledge the problem and take responsibility or ownership. And this is for every sector in the legal profession. Every sector has to or must support lawyer well-being. And each of us in our own different ways can take a leadership role in our own practice section to change the mindset or to change the hearts and minds and the culture from this sort of passive denial that we've had for so many years to really a proactive support for change. I think all of us together really have the capacity to make a difference. And for way too long, many of us have been turning a blind eye to what we see in the results of the study as a widespread health problem. Many in the profession have, at best, behaved as if their colleagues' well-being is really none of my business and I don't want to get involved, to at worst believing that it is some sort of failing, or that supporting well-being or talking about these issues is going to affect their professional success. We need to take, each of us shares responsibility for promoting this, for acknowledging the problems, and for taking ownership of it. And to change the legal culture, each of us needs to play a role. Bree, I'm going to turn to you for the rest of the general recommendations.
Sure. Thank you, Tracy. So the next thing that we found was that we need to come up with an overall plan for how are we going to implement these recommendations. And it really is about top-down. We decided from the outset we were not going to write a report to individual lawyers telling them that they need to sleep more and eat their vegetables, right? We've done that. This is really about going to the change agents within the legal profession, asking them to get on board, and from a top-down approach, start doing the work that's necessary to bring about this culture change. So one piece of this is to develop a national action plan that continues the effort. So on that front, the National Task Force on Lawyer Well-Being that put together the report is continuing, and we're continuing on to pick pieces of this and to work on implementation, as well as to track and report all of the implementation efforts going on across the country. Additionally, I'm happy to report to you that the ABA, with current President Hillary Bass, has joined us, and we're so excited about that, and has established a work group on these issues. And they're working alongside us. So we have a tremendous amount of energy. And I'm thinking, if I were you listening to this right now, I would wonder, well, gosh, this sounds awfully pie in the sky. How is any of this going to get done? And I will tell you that it is starting to get done. And that is the most amazing thing to me about this whole process. So we have to do this on a national level, but also we really know that the rubber meets the road on a state-by-state level when we're looking at how the legal profession makes changes. And so within the report itself, and I do want to ask you to look over on the handout section there, and there's the Lawyer Wellbeing Report PDF, and open that up and take a look through it. But one of the prime things that it's asking in the exhibits is to the State Supreme Court, the Chief of the State Supreme Court, here is an action plan for you. Here is a checklist for what we hope you will do, and here are the players that you need to bring together in your state. So I always think, like, how incredibly cheeky of us to have done this. But again, getting back to the passion thing, you know, I know, being in the Lawyers Assistance Program world, lawyers are suffering and dying and I see it, unfortunately, on a regular basis from where I sit. And so it's time to be a little cheeky and a time to sort of shake things up a bit. So we decided to, as we've often said in the group, swing for the fences. So what needs to be done on the national level, what needs to be done on the state level is put together an organized coalition to plan, fund, instigate, motivate, and track the implementation of what we're doing. And then at some point, I expect that we will go back and redo these surveys and these studies and see if we've actually been able to make a difference. Now, Jim, are you going to talk about the next slide? Or do you? Okay.
Yes. So the next thing, a general recommendation for everyone, is that leaders have to demonstrate a personal commitment to well-being. From the Supreme Court, from the ABA leadership, all of the stakeholders, all the leaders in each stakeholder section have to role model. It has to come from top leadership that personal commitment to well-being is important. So we're giving you your first assignment for this program right now, and I just ask that you write down this question for you to answer later. What do I do to tend to my own well-being? Because whether you recognize it or not, every lawyer in this country is a leader in some way. If you know a law student, if you know a younger lawyer who may be suffering from these problems, or who isn't, but isn't fully well, there's an opportunity to demonstrate your commitment and get buy-in from others. That's very, very important.
And we, in fact, started this process. We asked each of the members of the task force in their bio that you can see at the end is to write a sentence or two on how they attend to their own well-being, which was kind of revealing and fun, too.
Yes. Bree, I'm going to give it back to you for stigma
Great.
issues.
Thank you. So my opinion, and I'm not alone in this, that what is driving the degree of impairment and disorder, and I say the degree, the extent to which these issues get, is getting back to the stigma. And we really felt that within the task force that this had to be a top priority, because lawyers, as long as there's a stigma, they're not going to ask for help. The other thing is that happens is the issue of asking for help for yourself, but there's the issue of all of us who see our fellow lawyers, our colleagues, our judges on the bench who are suffering from these issues, and we don't feel like it's okay to ask to talk to them. We don't feel like it's okay to ask for help for them on their behalf. And all of this, what it comes down to really is about hiding what's going on. And when you're hiding these things, you can't get help. And so, the research shows, what we found is that the best way to reduce stigma is direct contact with somebody who has personally experienced a relevant disorder. So let's start right now. Let me take just a couple minutes to tell you a little bit of my story. I had, by the time I finished law school, I had a panic disorder. I dealt with a lot of anxiety, like so many of the law students that we see from the study. And it was modeled for me, and I didn't have any trouble following suit, to use alcohol to deal with that anxiety, because at the time it was a quick fix. It was legal. It was everywhere, and I saw all the other law students do it, so I started on that path. As time went forward and I was working for legal aid, doing a lot of domestic violence work, and I was overwhelmed with the trauma and what I was seeing my clients go through. And so I went back and dealt with those really uncomfortable feelings, again, with alcohol. As life goes on and life happens, I started dealing with a variety of types of depression over different things that were happening in my life. And what I found was the quickest fix, again, was alcohol. Well, that quick fix worked for a good long while until it didn't work anymore. And it started to, the disease, the disorder, started to take apart my life. And it's the thing about that is if you look at my resume, you'd see I'd have all these great jobs and be involved with the Bar Association and on the board of directors of this and that and executive director of this, et cetera, et cetera. That's what the front that I was putting for everybody. But then if you could actually know what was going on, I was miserable. And I was slowly killing myself with alcohol until a day came and I was finally willing to get some help. So tremendous misery for myself, tremendous misery for my family and my friends and the people around me. And there's no reason why in this day and age in 2017 that it has to be this way. So there's some of my passion coming out about this. Jim, I'm going to advance it, and you want to talk about the next one?
Yes. So lawyer assistance programs, each state has its own lawyer assistance program. Each state has different funding and circumstances in which that lawyer assistance program was developed. Each lawyer assistance program is not equal in its funding, in its support from major legal stakeholders, but each lawyer assistance program is quite honestly amazing. I've seen all of the jurisdictions in the U.S., their lawyer assistance programs, and for what they have, they do so much. But the fact that we have so many issues in the legal profession shows that we need to do more. So each key stakeholder has to partner with lawyer assistance programs and help get the message out throughout the legal profession, help educate lawyers and empower the profession to address this well-being crisis. Each major stakeholder has to partner with the lawyer assistance programs in developing messages. You know, my office is actively involved in the admissions process. We give the bar exam. We do the character and fitness analysis. So we go in with our lab director into the law schools in orientation and throughout the law school and emphasize this well-being issue, emphasize the confidentiality issue of getting help, and emphasize the fact that you will have a better chance of it being admitted to the practice of law if you do get help and if you do have the objective evidence that any problem in the past has been taken care of. So it's so important that we develop a stronger, better financed lawyer assistance program. So that's our next recommendation, that each of us find a way to support your local lawyer assistance program, even if it's volunteering. There are so many volunteer opportunities with your lawyer assistance program.
And I just want to say thank you to Jim because he's really demonstrated here. I am the head of the Lawyers Assistance Program in Texas. I do this work. But notice I'm not the one that talked about it. I have a great ally in the regulators community who can come in and talk just as well about the LAP programs as I can. And that's what we really need and hope will be available for all of us. This next one, you know, it's one of those things where you'd think there wouldn't be much discussion around it, but I will actually tell you that how to deal with this issue had the most level of discussion among the task force because we wanted to be realistic. There's a discussion of everything from not very serious discussion, but to not have alcohol at, say, bar association events. There was discussion of we shouldn't even mention this because then if we contain this in the report, people will not adopt it or advance that because we contain that one piece in here. So what we came up with was de-emphasize alcohol at events, and I think that is a really sound recommendation. Because not everybody, not even the majority, have a problem with alcohol. And so we really wanted to make clear with everyone that we are not a temperance movement. We're not trying to take away the open bars at the annual meetings, et cetera. But we wanted to hopefully get people to start thinking about what are some additions to having that at a bar association meeting, or as a way for a law firm to get to know one another. And really, I would like to frame it as a matter of inclusivity. As somebody myself who is in recovery from alcoholism, I would say, especially if you're new, you're not going to go to those meetings. You're not going to go to those networking events, and so you're cut out. There are plenty of people who don't drink alcohol for religious reasons or for health reasons, and we're eliminating all of those people from participating in networking events. So, I mean, it's not the era of Mad Men anymore. We certainly should be capable of moving beyond that, coming fully into the 2017, and thinking about diverse and inclusive options for our members.
And just to add on that a little bit, my office also administers the mandatory continuing legal and judicial education programs here in Colorado, and we know that folks who are putting on seminars, presentations, if they want good attendance, they have alcohol. It brings people in. Well, there are other ways, a lot of other ways, to get good attendance at events. And it just requires us to be a little more creative and a little more thoughtful and mindful of these issues when we plan those events. The next general recommendation deals with a dialogue about suicide prevention. Bree had discussed earlier statistics where 6% of law students in the survey had suicidal thoughts in the last year. And for lawyers, similarly, 11.5% had suicidal thoughts during their career. The statistics are grim when it comes to the number of suicides. If you really follow it in your state and follow each headline of another lawyer committing suicide, it shows that we have a higher instance of suicide rates than other professions. But we don't talk about it. And we need to start talking about it. We need to reduce the stigma associated with raising the topic and recognizing that just the conversation could possibly save a life, recognizing that there are alternatives to this, that there are a lot of support systems to help with this. We have to create sponsor awareness programs regarding the signs of suicide and just have these discussions, these important discussions, beginning that dialogue.
And Jim, are you going to continue with, with some recommendations, some specific recommendations in the various categories?
Yes. So let's get into the specific recommendations for judges at this point. And we're starting with that because if you think about it, first, the state Supreme Court or the highest court in each jurisdiction needs to set the tone for this in that state. It's so important to have Supreme Court involvement, but also every judge's involvement. Judges are leaders in the community, and judges have to make that personal commitment to well-being and also communicate throughout the profession that well-being is a priority. That's why we are going to the state Supreme Courts and asking them to develop an action plan. People need to hear it from the highest court that well-being is a priority. And now I'm going to hand that off to, I think, Bree is next.
Yes. So we're hoping that judicial regulators and the judicial commissions on judicial conduct, et cetera, can create policies for how to deal with not only policies but specific procedures on how to deal with judges who may be impaired and are continuing to serve on the bench. It's not uncommon to see a statute or some specific regulation that something can be done, but I rarely see where it's really spelled out and any guidance is being given. We are hoping that there could be knowledge disseminated that the lawyer and judges assistance programs are ready and available to provide confidential assistance to them. Most all of the lawyer assistance programs, whether they have it in their name or not, also provide services to members of the judiciary, and all of them, by the way, provide services to law students. And for everybody to know that the Commission on Lawyers Assistance Program has a judicial peer support network. So if somebody calls that helpline there, we are actually able to pair them with a judge with a similar issue who is a little bit farther down the road in recovery, pair them with somebody else who is across the country. And we would love for people to use that a little bit more. So in regards to the well-being surveys, you notice we had a study for law students and a study for lawyers, but there is no study for the state of the well-being of our judiciary. So we made this recommendation, and the Commission on Lawyers Assistance Programs of the ABA, we are already on this and are starting the work to implement this recommendation, and are in the planning stages of developing this study, which would track the questions that we have for the lawyer study. And we will certainly make those results available to people when they come out. And the other thing here in regards to the judges, they are on the front lines when it comes to knowing when a lawyer in their community, in their court, is having problems. And so we would like for them and their staff to become trained on recognizing the signs of impairments, know their lawyer's assistance program in their state and how to make referrals. And also the judges have the opportunity to, again, being leaders in this area and put on programs in their courts and encourage attendance. We see that going on regularly. We know that it can be done much more widely. So Jim, I'm going to turn it over back to you.
So the next section is for the regulators, those who regulate the practice of law. And we define that broadly. It not only includes the disciplinary folks, it includes everyone who participates in regulation, those who do CLE, those who do admissions. The lawyer assistance programs are part of regulation. The attorney mentoring programs, if they're Supreme Court or bar related, are part of attorney regulation. The lawyers who represent other lawyers in malpractice actions, in regulatory actions, are part of the regulatory function. But we go back to the state Supreme Court in our first regulator recommendation, and that regulator recommendation deals specifically. Could somebody advance the slide? I apologize. That that recommendation asks that each court adopt regulatory objectives that prioritize lawyer well-being. What's a regulatory objective? It's a decision by each state Supreme Court on why we regulate the practice of law. Jurisdictions throughout the world have set regulatory objectives, and they're just now starting to be developed by U.S. jurisdiction. But it's a reevaluation, and it's a reflective practice on why we regulate. We know we want to instill public confidence in the administration of justice, improve lawyer competence, improve client protection, but also a regulatory objective should be improve lawyer well-being. Colorado just went through this exercise, and we added a regulatory objective to help lawyers successfully navigate the practice of law throughout the stages of their career, through an active lawyer assistance program, through an active attorney mentoring program, and through proper regulatory activity. Washington also has just adopted regulatory objectives. These regulatory objectives help set the agenda that prioritize lawyer well-being. The next recommendation deals with implementing proactive management-based programs. Let's see. Well, was the next one CLE? I didn't.
I think the next one is a recommendation that I was going to cover about modifying the rules to recognize that well-being was or is or should be a part of the duty of competence. And in that, vein, as a former regulator myself, for first at the state level and then at the national level or at the federal level, we were looking to the ABA Model Rule of Professional Conduct 1.1, the competence rule, that states that lawyers owe a duty of competence to their clients. And well, what does that mean? Well, it means competent representation is defined to require the legal knowledge, skill, thoroughness, and preparation reasonably necessary for the representation. In our reports, we have suggested revising that rule or its comments to more clearly identify and include lawyers' well-being as part of the definition of competence. One alternative that we actually looked at was what California has done, where they have defined competence to include the mental, emotional, and physical ability reasonably necessary for the representation. Another option that we suggested in the report was to amend just the comments section of 1.1 to clarify that all professional competence requires an ability to comply with all of the courts, thinking of the court levels, essential eligibility requirements. I want to make a note of caution, though, however, when talking about possible rule changes or comment changes and enforceability or regulatory systems. Certainly in no way does this recommendation recommend or propose or suggest discipline solely for a lawyer's failure to satisfy some sort of well-being requirements or the essential eligibility requirements. Clearly, enforcement only needs to proceed in the case of actionable misconduct in a client representation or in connection with disciplinary proceedings. And for that, we can look to the ABA Model Rules for Disciplinary Enforcement, Rule 23. The real goal or the primary purpose for suggesting these possible changes certainly is not to threaten lawyers in any way with discipline for poor health, but really to underscore the importance of well-being in their client dealings, in their client representations. And it's really intended to remind, or for lawyers to be mindful of, that their mental and physical health impacts their representation of the clients. It impacts the administration of justice, and it also helps, this recognition also helps to ameliorate or reduce the stigma that Bree was talking about earlier with mental health disorders. And then the last portion of that would really be to encourage certain preventative strategies and self-care that lawyers could buy into. And Jim, I think you have the next one.
I do. Thank you. The next one is implementing proactive management-based programs that address well-being. You know, the regulatory framework in the U.S. has traditionally been reactive. We have these prescriptive rules, and if you violate them, it's like whack-a-mole. We come out and discipline you. There's so much more the regulator can do to help lawyers successfully navigate the practice of law. And one of them is, for example, a lawyer self-assessment program. We have the data. We know when lawyers get in trouble. We know what management, what systems and policies issues get lawyers into trouble, and how lawyers can do better by building an ethical infrastructure. So these lawyer self-assessment programs address basic areas of the practice where we help with systems and policies and procedures to put in place so the lawyer can do better and thrive. Well, part of that is the topic of well-being. We all have to be conscious of lawyer well-being and reflect on that. So we ask that each state consider developing this type of program that incorporates well-being into that lawyer's self-assessment so that there's reflection, contemplation on this issue, and there are continuous reminders throughout the year that well-being is a priority. And then I'm going to pass it back to you, Tracy.
Thanks, Jim. The next recommendation that in the regulator section that is proposed is to expand continuing legal education requirements to include well-being topics. And as Bree said earlier, we've actually made great progress on this recommendation already. In 2017, the new Model Continuing Legal Education Rule was approved by the ABA House, and it recommends mandatory mental health programming. And the model rule actually requires lawyers. Some states already had some version of this, but the model rule requires lawyers to earn at least 1 credit hour every 3 years of CLE that addresses prevention, detection, and or treatment of mental health and substance use disorders. Other options to this, if states are not adopting the model rule, they could consider authorizing ethics credits or various other specialized credits for CLE programs that address these topics. California and Illinois are examples of state bars that already have such requirements, and I'm sure there are others. And the other thing is that the ABA's new model rule provisionally recommends that states grant CLE credit for lawyer well-being programming. Tennessee is a great example of a state that has adopted sort of a pioneering authorization credit for a broad set of well-being topics. And their CLE regulation, which is 5H, actually authorizes ethics and professionalism credit for programs that are designed to enhance optimism, resilience, relationship skills, energy and engagement of their practices, and to foster cultures that support outstanding professionalism. These are all things that other states might want to follow, either be it with adoption of the ABA model rule or other programs that are similarly suited to address these types of well-being issues. And I'll turn it back over to Jim.
Thank you, Tracy. I'm proud to report that Colorado now has rules before its court that provides for CLE credit for those programs as well, amongst many other recommendations. The next one is very important to the regulatory process, and it's allowing one-way sharing of information from the regulators to lawyer assistance programs. But again, emphasizing that there is no sharing of information by the lawyer assistance programs to the regulators. What do we know? The regulatory process has confidentiality provisions built into it. That information is siloed, so oftentimes the admissions department doesn't share with the attorney regulation department, etc. But in the past, there was no way to get information from the regulator to the lawyer assistance program. So it wasn't even thought of that if you see a lawyer in distress and you believe it's substance use related or mental health disorder related, that information wasn't shared immediately with the lawyer assistance program. We want to change those rules. We want to make sure that the message is regulators can provide that information immediately as soon as they find out about it to the lawyer assistance program, so the lawyer assistance program can act. Why? Well, number one, it helps prevent future misconduct. The next day, that impaired lawyer could do a lot of damage to new clients. So it helps promote the public interest and ensure client protection. But just as important, it also helps that lawyer. It helps that lawyer get treatment earlier, address the problems earlier, get effective treatment, and effectively address the problems. But also, in the long run, it reduces the number of complaints against the lawyer related to that impairment, and hopefully help save that lawyer's license. Because we know that lawyers who get treatment usually have a high success rate, much higher than the general population. Lawyers do well in recovery. We have that incentive. We've invested a lot of money into our law license, and we don't want to lose it. So we have that incentive to do well. So the one-way flow of information from the regulator to the assistance program accelerates the much-needed help to reduce the wake of damage that occurs in this situation. Next, adjust the admissions process to support law students coming in to become licensed lawyers. starting with first week of orientation, there has to be clear direction that treatment and rehabilitation of those who suffer from impairments is critical to their admission. You can't hide the problem. The problem doesn't go away. You have to address it, and the fact that you address it helps you with your application for admission. It doesn't hurt you. One thing that in the past, bar admission applications had a lot of behavioral health questions on it. They weren't specifically conduct related. They were most likely inappropriate under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And so we're asking that each state analyze the questions in the bar application and narrow those questions that are related to behavioral health history only to conduct and address the conduct, not the status of the applicant. Adopt rules for conditional admission of those folks who may have suffered from impairment in the past and have sought recovery and treatment, but haven't had a demonstrated period of recovery. Give them an opportunity to practice law under specific conditions and restraints so that they can develop that necessary 3 to 5 years of being in recovery that provides such good statistics of success. And then to have essential eligibility admission requirements. There are now 17 states that have essential eligibility requirements. It's basically a job description, an ADA job description for lawyers, and what is essential for the practice of law. It helps the regulators in determining who is able to practice law and who isn't in a much more comprehensive and objective fashion. And then we have to publish our data. We know that there are very few denied admissions due to mental health disorders and substance use. Those who seek treatment are successful. It's only a very small number of folks who don't seek treatment, who've had problems in the past and don't seek treatment, and are therefore not admitted. By publishing those numbers, we reassure the law student that it's okay to get help, and it's better to get help, and that the success rate demonstrates that they'll have a better career if they do. So those are the recommendations that we have for regulators.
Thanks, Jim. And so moving on to talk about employers, we really felt that this is another place where we would start with looking at the infrastructure. How do we change the culture? We're looking at changing the culture of the legal profession. Well, how do we change the culture of law firms? And so we institutionalize and build in mechanisms for tracking that, because this is an ongoing process. So we suggest the appointment of a lawyer well-being committee or a well-being advocate within the firm, and for them to come up with ideas so that well-being starts to become the norm of that law firm. We also are looking at recommendations for model law firm policies. There really needs to be set out very clearly, because right now the policies, are like don't drink on the job, basically. That's what they are. And that is not, in this day and age, sufficient. These policies need to provide a clear mechanism for what lawyers and staff should do if they're concerned about another colleague's problems. They should establish procedures for a lawyer who wants to seek confidential help without being penalized. We're also looking at complying with the ADA here. There should be, within those law firm policies, a sample return to work agreement. Under what conditions is the lawyer allowed to come back to work? And really set things out. And be very clear also in these policies, as well as other documents and that the law firm has, of how the state's Lawyers Assistance Program can be of service to them. And the other things that law firms can do is look at what can they do to combat the social isolation that tends to be a part and parcel of our profession. And talking to you from the Lawyers Assistance Program community, I will tell you that the social isolation that we deal with is the greatest breeding ground for the impairments we see, for the substance use disorders, for the depression. And we also need the firms to set examples for what it looks like to take care of yourself and your loved ones, to take care of yourself mentally, take care of your body, and make sure that they're not rewarding extreme behaviors. How many hours, a few hours of sleep can somebody get by with, and not encourage that, not have that part of that firm's culture. They can do better because they're going to do better by their clients when they do. Jim, I'm going to turn the next one over to you.
And then other things employers can do is provide education in the firm, in the work environment on well-being. That education is important for management. It's important for the employee. It emphasizes to each the psychological challenges of the job and how to address that in the job. So it's important that employers be very proactive for their employees in providing education. I think that's it for that slide.
Okay. I'm going to take you through talking about law schools. I was in law school, graduated in '89. I had the opportunity to go back sometime later and teach at the law school, and now I'm at the Lawyers Assistance Program, and we have 10 law schools in Texas, and so I get to go back and see that. And nothing has changed. Still, there very much is a culture of competition, of disregard for one's own well-being that sets the stage for a disordered and impaired career in this profession. So we need to make some changes there. So one of the things that can be done is to train the faculty and the administrators for how to detect and assist impaired law students. Even though it is required for law school credentialing, it is many professors still do not take attendance, and that is considered to be a key way to start looking for if you have a student who is suffering from some sort of impairment. They can provide information on the Lawyers Assistance Program and how to find resources on their webpage or in every syllabus that's presented to the students. There's a variety of ways there if we just have the will and the energy to do this. The law schools are more than capable of figuring out creative ways to make this happen. Tracy, next.
Thanks. And following up on what Bree said, we really need to provide educational opportunities on well-being topics to the students. And there are several ways that law schools can go about this that will actually provide some support and some benefit and some education. The first one really is to provide well-being programming during the 1L year. Maybe not necessarily right at the orientation. I mean, certainly part of it, but it can be overwhelming for new students. But certainly during this first year where they can get some information, communication, where we give them information that they say, seeking help really is the best way to optimize their studies. And they're in the business of ensuring that they graduate and move successfully into the law practice. And we should also consider providing this kind of information at other vulnerable times during the law school career, whether it be before fall final exams, certainly when students may get their first grades, and the period before spring final exams. And there's a great program right out of Southwestern Law Schools, and it's a 1L class that is offered that's called Peak Performance Program. And the goal of it really is to help these new law students who have come into this new world where there's all kinds of stress and chaos in their life and in their schoolwork, to help them de-stress, focus, and actually perform well and succeed in law school. Another way to provide these educational opportunities is to create and develop a well-being course or a lecture series for the students to talk about these kinds of issues. There's all sorts of research out there that has found that teaching well-being skills really enhances the students' performance in school, not only on standardized tests or essay tests, but it improves their study habits, it improves any submissions of homework or writing samples that they're having to do, and it is a boon to long-term academic success. In our materials, we actually have included the content of a well-being course that if people are interested in starting or developing or promoting, sort of gives a guideline of things that should be contained within it. And with that, I'm going to move along to the next recommendation center, which is recommendations for bar associations. And to that end, it's another group that we looked at that is an important piece of this puzzle of getting the message out there and supporting well-being initiatives. And in this area, one of the recommendations is that bar associations that have so many different members of the legal profession moving through it adopt practices that actually highlight well-being. And there are several ways that bar associations can go about this. And some of the states are actually already incorporating some of these recommendations. The first one we talked about a little bit, and it comes back to the CLE issue, where bar associations can sponsor high-quality CLE programming on these kinds of topics, well-being related topics. They can also create educational materials to support well-being or individual well-being, as well as best practices that might be implemented by legal organizations, along the lines of some model policies on well-being related topics, work-life balance policies, mentoring, all those succession planning, all those kinds of things. Another way that bar associations can go about addressing the issue is to train their staff to be aware of lawyer assistance programs, resources, and actually refer their members. A bar association person may be the first person who actually notices or thinks that there may be an issue, and can be the person who coordinates any sort of intervention between the lawyer and the LAP program, or for a lawyer who's facing some sort of crisis. In addition, bar associations may be in the best position to perform research on lawyer well-being as a part of their annual member survey. Certainly being able to ask various questions in the surveys so that they can gauge awareness of the issue within their membership. And lastly, another way that bar associations can promote this process and adopt practices is really to serve as an example of best practices relating to lawyer well-being at bar association events. There's all kinds of examples from around the country where bar associations sponsor family-friendly fun runs. There's one in Maricopa County in Arizona through their race judicata. Here in Illinois, we do a similar event. Maybe organizing functions that are more family-friendly, or scheduling programming during times that doesn't necessarily interfere with personal and family time. All different kinds of well-being related education and training through the bar associations that will help get the message out there. And Jim, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Thank you, Tracy. When we're talking about recommendations for employers, we've got a lot of feedback from lawyers saying you'll never change the law firm culture. There's no incentive for law firms to change their culture. And so you got to figure out how to motivate law firms to change. Well, a good way to do it is to demonstrate that it actually improves law firm performance and greater client satisfaction if you do have well-being policies, but also we have to hit the bottom line. And so that's why we brought the professional liability insurance carriers into the process. And we want them, and they are very responsive to incentivize desired behavior in their underwriting risk. With these stats, we can show a direct correlation. We can show that lawyers are in crisis, and we can show that well-being policies have a positive effect. And so the insurance carriers can get involved in underwriting risk and give incentives for law firms to adopting these policies and give rate reductions. 3 carriers in particular, ALAS, which addresses the large law firms, is actively participating in the ABA working group on this issue. So is ALPS and CNA. They are actively involved. So we're working to get liability carriers involved on that issue. And then also asking the PLIs to actively support the Lawyer Assistance Program as part of their loss prevention and mitigation strategy. Give them money, give them stats, give them data to help the LAP programs do a better job in mitigating risk. And by collecting data, they can give data. So it's important for the PLI folks to collect data when impairment is a factor in claims analysis. And I'm going to head back to you, Bree.
Yeah, and so the last section is regarding lawyers' assistance programs. And I think the biggest message we have here is that with the report overall is that lawyers' assistance programs can't do it all. We can't just turn to them and say, you handle this. It's something that everybody has to do together. So the recommendations were really for all the other players in this to support the LAPs, to help make sure that they are stable and adequate funding, and that we emphasize the confidentiality. So I'm going to turn it over to Tracy.
Great.
Or Jim. No, Jim.
State-by-state implementation. So how do we get the states involved? How do we make the change? We did a letter. One of our task force members was Chief Justice Don Lemons of Virginia, and he wrote a letter enclosing the report to each state court chief justice with a to-do list on reviewing the report, creating priorities in that state, and developing a state action plan for that state. And the first activity is to convene the state stakeholders. We were as audacious as to provide them a list of potential folks that should be on that state's commission, and it includes representatives from the state judiciary, law schools, law firms, regulators' offices, and LAP programs. We're happy to report that we're getting, every week, we're getting a couple more states involved. Right now, Virginia, Tennessee, Colorado, Florida, New Mexico, and Arkansas have begun commissions to address this issue. My understanding is that California is also in the process of doing so, and Oregon and Washington. So we're building support along the way. We're getting buy-in by the Chief Justices. Bree and I will be presenting at the Conference of Chief Justices. It's not enough to have 10 states doing this, but with 10 to 15 states in January doing this and showing the momentum, we think we can increase those numbers to the other states.
Jim and Bree, I want to thank you for sharing all of your expertise and all of your experience with not only the surveys but with the report and the task force. We have a lot of questions in our list, and we're now ready to begin taking questions from the live audience as well. So I'm going to turn it back over to the operator and have them provide instructions to our audience, go through some questions, and Jim, I also want to leave you with some time to give your last thought or your last sort of commitment statement.
You want me to do that now?
After the operator comes on with the code and the how to do live questions.
Okay.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, if you'd like to ask a question, use the chat function in the lower left corner of the webinar. type your question in the bottom field and click the Send button. Before we take our first question, we will now give you your ABA Participation Verification Code, required to receive CLE credit for this program. Copy this code. You'll be asked to enter the code in the online attendance form following this program. The ABA Participation Verification Code is 12654180. That code again is 12654180. Again, the ABA Participation Verification Code is 12654180. That code again, 12654180. And I'll turn it back to our speakers.
Great, thanks so much. Jim, before I turn to some of the questions that we have lined up, what I would like to do is turn to you for, you presented us with one question earlier on during the discussion, but I want to give it to you to present sort of a commitment statement, if you will.
Sure, Tracy, thank you. You know, earlier I talked about that I asked everybody to write down a question. How do I tend to my own personal well-being? It's important for us to reflect on that. What do we do to thrive in each of those 6 categories? So for an example, for me, I try to to exercise regularly. It's pretty much walking these days, but walking helps. Gardening helps. Listening to music helps reinvigorate me and make me whole. Just being more social and getting out there into the world and being more community-oriented, volunteer-oriented helps with my personal well-being. Those are some personal examples. But then I also ask everyone to write down an additional question. What can I do to change the culture of the legal profession? What within my own sphere, how can I influence the legal profession? Make a commitment. Find something that you believe within the recommendations that you can adopt, that you can forward, that you can be a proponent of change on, or another potential recommendation of helping us change the culture of the legal profession toward that of lawyer well-being. I ask you to do at least one commitment for change.
Thanks, Jim. I want to turn to some of the questions, and the first one I'm going to turn to is actually very interesting because the answer is very interesting. And I'll leave it up to Bree and or Jim to respond. But the question is, regarding our challenges, what are the numbers prior to entering law school? And what the person is asking is, are we mentally unhealthy prior to entering law school?
The numbers are of the general population before entering law school, and let's talk about problematic drinking. And use that as an example, is about 10%. That's the general population, just very roughly. And so I don't think that it is, it seems, I will say the statistics seem to bear out, if you look at it, that there is something about the law school process and being in the legal profession that starts to pathologize the way that we interact and deal with the extreme stresses of the circumstances.
There's also some correlation where the first-year law students demonstrated less problems,
right.
But as each year went by, the problems increased. So it indicates that it's progressive.
So that the law school experience actually may be harmful to your health.
That's right.
Yeah. Of course.
Another question. Oh, go ahead, Jim.
Well, of course, some of us may be, those of us with depression or bipolar issues may be attracted to the law, and so there may be some circumstances where people who are more prone to mental health issues may be attracted to the law. But overall, that may be the case, but there's something going on in the law schools that exacerbates the problem. We do know that. And
moving forward, there were a couple questions that were asked with, with a sort of an underlying issue as to why is the legal profession having these problems? Why are legal professionals and the people in this business so stressed out, suffering from so many mental health problems, suffering from substance use issues? What are the reasons for it?
A lot of it is related to stress. There's also the linkage to we tend to be perfectionists, and perfectionism sets one up for a variety of these issues and is closely linked to suicidality. Jim?
We live in a toxic environment. We live in an adversarial system in which we're constantly competing. There's an issue of collegiality and professionalism that when it breaks down, it creates greater stress. It's easy for collegiality to break down when one person's exhibiting stress and anxiety, and that has kind of a reverberative effect to every person that person becomes involved with. And let's face it, the stats aren't good as far as people going into law school. They're saddled with tremendous debts. Young lawyers, when they graduate from law school, they have significant debt, and their job prospects are not as good as they used to be. Of course you're going to be stressed when you're a brand new lawyer and you can't get enough of a salary to cover your law school debt, let alone your mortgage. A mortgage increases, and finding a good job. It's just not as profitable of a profession as it used to be, and that causes a lot of stress.
And then just being young and new in the profession, and everything you do is new and trying to figure it all out. And because you're a perfectionist, you're terrified of messing anything up, and that really pours on the stress as well.
And mentoring, we can't forget mentoring. We don't have as good of mentoring as we used to. It used to be kind of traditional that a person would go into a law school or other organized structure where you had built-in mentors. And that's why one of our recommendations is to have good attorney mentoring programs to augment or to assist for those lawyers who are going into solo practice earlier than what they wanted to, so that they can have mentors as well and maybe reduce their stress.
And I'm going to add one more comment to that. It's sort of our self-identity or what we do, what our profession does. I mean, we're in the business of helping others, so why can't I help myself? I can help myself. Look at all that I've done. I don't need anybody else to help me with this problem. And so a lot of it comes from that angst between I can fix this versus I may need help and I can't ask. Some of the other questions that were asked today were about services that are provided either by LAPS or other organizations. And the first one that I want to start with is services offering for law students, or services offered for law students that may have failed the bar or didn't pass the bar. Or did the services only extend to practicing attorneys?
It's going to vary for the LAPS from state to state. But as a practice, I'll tell you almost all will help somebody who has been in law school and has attended. It's not uncommon here at all in Texas to be working with a student who is in the process of trying to retake the bar. Same thing with lawyers. Most LAP programs are going to assist a lawyer regardless of their licensure status. So maybe they're subject to discipline, or maybe they've even been disbarred, and most all of them will continue to provide services.
Bree, what about services, and Jim, I'll let you finish. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, in Colorado, we've developed a committee to specifically address that point for applicants who have failed the bar, and what can my office as the regulator do to get them to LAP programs and get them involved in other activities to help them deal with that issue and prepare for the next time they take the bar exam.
What about attorneys who are actually thinking of leaving the profession because of well-being issues? Do LAPS or are there any other services that are directed towards that group of people?
Some of the LAPS that are better funded and resourced will provide lawyers with training and ideas on how to modify their practice, transition to a different sort of practice. Some of the labs even provide counselors on site. So again, it depends on how well resourced the program is in that particular state. There's definitely a need always for that, but not always the resources to provide the service.
And the regulators can play an important role in that as well. One, starting with demographic information, keeping data on lawyers as they reach each stage of their career, each age group, working with medical professionals to develop educational programs on transition, about training lawyers about incapacity issues, steps to take when concerned about a lawyer's incapacity, succession planning programs. If your state doesn't have a transition planning manual or checklist, there are many states who do, and so they don't have to reinvent the wheel. They can adopt similar manuals to what those of us that do have them have, and all other kinds of ways to address the transition of lawyers. That's a really important topic. As more of us are getting older, 55% of us are age 50 or older in this country, and we're going to have a large baby boomer population transitioning. So we have to be ready for it.
One last question that has come up several times is, do either of you have any suggestions or theories as to why things, from the survey that was taken, why things get better over time for older or more experienced lawyers?
I think that when I go out and talk about this, a consistent response that I think plays a big part is perspective. As we age, we've got a better perspective on things and we're able to deal with the stresses. That's a piece of it. Another piece that hasn't been measured, but I believe is at work here, is that lawyers that are not, find that they're not well suited for a high stress, say a litigation practice, do leave the practice of law. So you have the level of attrition as well. Jim?
And I don't know whether the study shows that it gets better as you get older, or that in this snapshot in time, it's particularly stressful for the law student and the young lawyer. And I kind of tend to believe that it's particularly stressful for the law student and the young lawyer right now, with the job issues, with the pay issues, and kind of.
Yeah.
And the debt and the culture of the millennial generation. It's a culture shock to suddenly be exposed to the legal profession and how the legal profession operates for a millennial. I think that's kind of a difficult adjustment to make.
Well, I want to thank Bree and Jim for all of their expertise during this CLE today and for all the information that they've provided. We are out of time, sadly, but before we leave, I want to ask all attendees who would like CLE credit to stay connected for instructions to get your CLE certificate. To our faculty, Bree and Jim, again, thank you so much for sharing your information today. On behalf of the ABA, I'm Tracy Kepler, thanking you all for joining us. Before leaving, please wait for the evaluation to come up on your screen. Thanks so much, and I will turn you over to the operator.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. On behalf of the American Bar Association, thank you for participating in this program. Today's program was part of the ABA Free CLE Series sponsored by the American Bar Association, Commission on Lawyer Assistance Programs, Center for Professional Responsibility, and the ABA Center for Professional Development. Register now for the December Free CLE program, Pants on Fire, the Duty of Candor Before Tribunals in Discovery and During Negotiations on Monday, December 18th. To view the program description and all upcoming programs in the series, visit http://www.americanbar.org/CLE/free_CLE.html. Thank you and have a wonderful day.